The shuttle was late. Every other cadet had arrived through the main docking port, walked the wide glass corridor, and entered the Galactic Strategic Academy with clean boots and pressed uniforms. The arrival hall was still full of them, standing in clusters, talking in clicks and hums and translated whispers, when the lower bay alert pinged once and went quiet. Nobody important ever came through the lower bay. It was used for cargo, for supplies, for things that did not need a ceremony. Rail Dunn came through the lower bay. She stepped off the cargo shuttle with a single worn pack over one shoulder. Her boots were old and thick-soled, built for uneven ground. Her jacket was plain gray. She was short, even by human standards, and stocky in the way that came not from training, but from years of moving under a gravity that wanted to crush you into the floor. Her hands were calloused. Her eyes moved slowly around the room, not with wonder, not with nerves, just the steady scan of someone checking for exits. She walked into the main arrival hall, and the crowd near the entrance shifted. Not loudly, not rudely, just the quiet animal response to something that did not fit the pattern. A few alien cadets stepped back without knowing why. She smelled like iron and burned earth and something older than all of it. Her origin tag was visible on her pack's front strap, the way all cadets wore theirs on orientation day. Standard practice, so the intake staff could direct people to the right lines. Kareth, 5. Sorvo read it from across the hall. He was tall, pale blue, built long, and lean the way people from low-gravity worlds often were. He had arrived early, first through the main port, and had already gathered a circle of cadets around him the way confident people always did in new rooms. He had a bright, easy laugh. He had used it many times already that morning. He used it again now. Kareth 5, he said, not quietly. They're pulling from the mud worlds now. The cadets near him caught the joke fast enough. A few laughed. A few smiled without knowing the full meaning, but following his lead anyway. It carried across the hall the way mockery always did, a little louder than intended, a little further than planned. Rail heard it. She stopped walking. She turned her head and looked at Sorvo the way you look at a sky that might produce rain. Direct, calm, measuring. She held that look for 2 seconds, maybe 3. Sorvo held her gaze just long enough to feel something he could not name. And then she looked away and kept walking toward the intake desk. That was all. No words. No expression. She just moved on. Across the hall, near the far wall, a cadet with 4 arms and large compound eyes watched the whole thing without moving. This was Ren, from a quiet ocean world called Selu. Ren had a habit of watching before speaking. Ren did not laugh. Above the hall, on the upper walkway behind the long observation window, Director Olin stood with a cup of something warm going cold in his hand. He had run the academy for 19 cycles. He had seen 10,000 cadets walk through that hall. He watched Rail reach the intake desk, set her pack down, and give her name in a voice too low to carry up to him. That he did not look at Sorvo. He looked at the girl from Kareth 5. He set his cup down and picked up his personal data pad. He opened a new note. He typed her name. Then he closed the pad and went back to watching. Rail was assigned her quarters on the 3rd residential ring. A small room with a single bunk, a narrow shelf, and a window that looked out at the stars on one side and the station's maintenance scaffolding on the other. She dropped her pack on the bunk. She opened it and began to place things on the shelf in a specific order, the way someone with a long habit of organizing small spaces always did. Last thing out of the pack was a stone. Small, smooth, dark brown with a faint red streak through the middle. She set it at the center of the shelf. She pressed her thumb against it and held it there. The stone was from Kareth 5. She had picked it up from the ground outside her colony's wall the morning she left. Not as a symbol, not as a ritual, just because it was familiar, and she knew that familiar things had value in unfamiliar places. She breathed in. The room was quiet. It was clean. The gravity was light, almost embarrassingly so, 0.9 standard, which meant her body felt like it was constantly being asked to float. The air was filtered and cool and had no taste. Back home, the air always had a taste. She sat on the edge of the bunk and looked at the shelf and the stone and the stars outside the window. She was not sad. She was not angry. She was not thinking about the tall blue cadet in the hall or his easy laugh. She was thinking about tomorrow's schedule, which she had already read twice on the shuttle, and about which of the morning assessments would be the most useful. She had not come here for comfort. She had not come here to prove something to anyone. She had come here to learn what she did not yet know. She lay back on the bunk, closed her eyes, and within 4 minutes she was asleep. Outside the window, the stars did not move. The simulation chamber smelled like electricity and recycled AI was a wide, circular room in the lower deck of the Academy, its walls lined with panels that could project any environment the system had on file. Forest ruins, burning ships, underwater caves. Whatever the instructors decided the cadets needed to survive that day, for the first physical assessment, they had chosen the ridgeline, a rocky highland terrain from a mid-gravity world, full of broken ground and fast-moving predator simulations. Standard difficulty, designed to test threat response, survival instinct, and how cadets moved under pressure when the terrain was not familiar. Each group of 8 went in sequence. The Sorvo's group went first. He moved well, there was no denying that. He was sharp in low-gravity movement, quick to identify threat angles, efficient with the training tools they were each issued at the door. His team cleared the scenario without losing a single simulated life. When they came out, Sorvo was breathing hard but standing tall, and the score on the wall display was high enough to draw murmurs from the cadets still waiting. He looked over at Rail and smiled. Not meanly, not this time. Just the smile of someone who believed the number beside his name said everything that needed saying. Rail looked at the display, then looked away. Her group was third. She walked in at the back of the line. Rin was in the same group, 2 places ahead. Brix, the large reptilian cadet from the dry world of DOS, was at the front. He had said nothing to Rail since orientation. He said very little to anyone. He moved through the world like a boulder that had decided to walk, slow and certain and hard to redirect. The chamber doors sealed behind them. The walls shifted. The floor textured up. The ridgeline appeared around them, gray rock and thin wind and a pale orange sky overhead. The temperature dropped 4 degrees. Rail breathed in. The first simulated predator came from the left, faster than the briefing notes had described, because the system had read the group's performance data and adjusted. It was the size of a large dog, 6-legged, with a body that stayed low to the ground. It targeted the nearest moving cadet, which was a small insectoid called Pell, who froze the moment it appeared. Rail was not the nearest cadet to it. She moved anyway. She crossed the ground between them in a short, flat sprint that had no wasted motion in it. She did not run the way people from lighter worlds ran, bouncing and long-strided. She ran like something that had learned to move under 1.4 standard gravity, low and compact, and fast in a way that did not look fast until you measured it. She caught the predator's front limb as it leaped. She used its weight against itself, a redirect, not a stop, and drove it sideways into the rock wall. The sim registered the threat as neutralized that IT had taken 11 seconds from first alert. She was already turning back toward the group, eyes scanning the ridgeline for the next marker. "Move to the high ground," she said. Her voice was flat and even. "Left side. The right has 2 more incoming." The group moved. They moved because the way she said it did not leave room for questions. What came next was 20 minutes of the chamber pushing harder than it was rated to push for first assessment groups. Secondary threats, environmental hazards, a timed extraction point that kept relocating. Rail did not command loudly. She did not give speeches. She said short things at the right moments, and the group responded to them the way people respond when someone near them clearly knows what they're doing. When it ended, the chamber door opened and the group walked out. Pell was shaking slightly. Ren's 4 arms were tight against its body. Brix had a long scrape across his forearm from the rock face, which the sim had made real enough to sting. Rail walked out last and looked at the score display. The number was the highest the chamber had logged in 11 assessment cycles. The room was very quiet. Sorvo looked at the number. He looked at Rail. He said nothing. The intake instructor, a long-faced alien called Drev who had run these assessments for 8 years, scrolled through the performance data on his pad with the careful slowness of someone checking to make sure the system had not made an error. It had not. Ren found Rail, near the water station along the far wall. That was real, Rin said quietly. Rail accepted a cup of water from the dispenser and drank half of it before answering. Everything I know is real, she said. Rin was quiet for a moment. Where did you learn to move like that? Rail thought about it. The honest answer was that she had not learned it anywhere specific. She had learned it the way you learned everything on Kareth 5, by doing it in a situation where not doing it correctly had consequences that the word consequence was far too gentle to describe. Home, she said. That evening, Director Olin reviewed the simulation data alone in his office. He watched the footage 3 times. He noted her eye movement, her decision timing, her positioning. Then he pulled up the Kareth 5 planetary file and read it the way he read things that mattered, slowly, from the beginning, without skipping. He read for a long time. When he finished, he set the pad down and looked at the ceiling. Of course, he said quietly, to nobody. Rest days at the academy were not really rest. The formal session stopped. The simulators went quiet. But the cadets still moved through the station's common areas, eating and talking and quietly measuring each other the way people in competitive places always did. There was always someone watching, always someone comparing. Rail used rest days the same way she used everything else. Carefully, she was in a mess hall reading a technical manual on station pressure systems when Rin sat down across from her with a tray of something blue and steaming. Rin did not ask permission. Rin just sat, which Rail found she did not mind. Can I ask you something about Kareth 5? Rin said. You can ask, Rail said, without looking up. What is it actually like? Not the file description, the real version. Rail closed the manual. She looked at Rin for a moment, deciding how much of this was useful conversation and how much was curiosity that would not go anywhere. Rin's compound eyes did not blink. There was no agenda in them that Rail could detect, only genuine interest. Heavy, she said. Everything is heavy. The air, the ground, the rain. You feel in your knees by the time you're 8 years old. The storms come in off the eastern ridges and they last for weeks. Not storm system weather. Actual weeks. You learn to track them or you do not last long outside the colony walls. And the fauna, they grew up alongside us, Rail said. That is the part people do not understand when they read the file. It is not that the animals on Kareth 5 are dangerous the way a random predator is dangerous. They evolved knowing humans were there. They know how we smell, how we move, what sound we make when we are afraid. They learned us, so we had to learn them back. Rin set down its utensil. How do children survive that? Carefully, Rail said. And together, nobody on Kareth 5 goes anywhere alone until they have proven they do not need to be watched. Even then, you tell someone where you are going. You always tell someone. She paused. A cadet 2 tables away dropped something metal and it rang against the floor. Rail's eyes moved to the sound and came back. A habit. My mother taught me to calm my breathing under a gravity storm, she continued. Not because it was a lesson, because I was 6 and panicking and she needed me to function. She pressed her hand flat against my chest and said, breathe from here, not from your throat. Slow down. You have more time than you think. Rail looked at the table. That is the most useful thing anyone ever taught me. Rin was quiet for a moment. It sounds like a hard way to grow up. It sounds that way from the outside, Rail said. From the inside, it was just life. We laughed. We had festivals after storm season. The food was good when the harvest came in. People looked after each other in ways I have not seen much of out here. She said the last part without bitterness, just as an observation, but Rin heard it clearly. Near the entrance to the mess hall, Sorvo stood with his tray, looking for his usual table. He passed close to Rail and Rin without stopping, but he slowed for a moment, just enough to catch the tail end of what Rail was saying. He moved on, sat down, and did not join in his group's conversation for a while. The human liaison officer, Liz, found Rail in the corridor after the meal. Liz was older, a woman with short, gray-streaked hair and the tired eyes of someone who had been explaining humans to aliens for a long time. She stopped Rail with a light touch on the arm. Settling in, Liz asked. Yes, Rail said. They will push you. More than the others, probably. Not from malice. Just because they will not know where your ceiling is, so they will keep going until they find it. That is fine, Rail said. They will respect you eventually, List said. It was meant to be encouraging. Rail considered it for a moment. I'm not here for respect, she said. I came here to learn what I do not know yet. There is a lot I do not know. That is enough reason. List looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Once, the way you nod at something that does not need any addition from you. Let me know if you need anything, List said, and walked on. Rail went back to her quarters. She sat at the narrow desk and opened the pressure systems manual again. Outside the window, the station's scaffolding caught the distant starlight and held it in dull angles of metal. She turned a page. Somewhere in the station's data core, the assessment system had already flagged her file for a secondary review. She did not know this. She was thinking about pressure tolerances and emergency bulkhead sequencing and a question she wanted to ask in the morning's technical session. Down on the shelf above the desk, the small brown stone from Kareth 5 sat where she had placed it on the first night. The room was quiet. The gravity was light. She had stopped noticing both. She read until her eyes told her stop, and then she slept. The alert came at the wrong time, which was the point that IT was not a scheduled drill. The Academy never announced a full-class emergency response exercise in advance, because emergencies did not announce themselves. One moment the cadets were in their various parts of the station going about a regular afternoon. And then the system klaxon rang twice, and the lights in every corridor shifted to a pale amber, and the voice of the drill coordinator said, calmly and without any warmth, that this was not a test of individual ability to IT was a test of whether they could function as one. The scenario was a station breach. Multiple decks, multiple entry points, failing atmosphere seals on levels 4 through 7. Simulated casualties already accumulating in the system's damage report, which updated every 90 seconds to show cadets what inaction cost. Leadership assignments were randomized and displayed on the corridor panels as cadets moved to their positions. Rail was assigned command of Second Response Team. Her team had 8 cadets. Ren was among them. So was Brix. They met at the junction of Corridor 9 on Level 5. Rail arrived before anyone else and spent 40 seconds reading the damage report panel on the wall before the others showed up. By the time the last cadet jogged around the corner, she had already mapped the 3 most urgent problems in her head and ranked them by what would kill people first. We have 2 failing seals on this level, she said, before anyone had finished catching their breath. One is closer, but the other is worse. We fixed the worst one first. Ren and Pell, you're on the seal kit. Brix and I will hold the corridor if the simulation sends anything at us. The rest of you go in pairs. I will tell you where. Nobody asked questions. She had said in a way that did not leave room for questions, not by being aggressive, but by being clear. Clarity in a crisis was its own kind of authority. The first 10 minutes went cleanly. Then 2 cadets from a different team, working a parallel corridor, triggered a secondary failstate by using the wrong override sequence on a pressure valve. It was the kind of mistake the simulation was designed to reward, because in a real breach, one wrong move cascaded into 3. The scenario escalated. 2 new damage points appeared on the level above them. The update timer dropped from 90 seconds to 60. Several cadets in adjacent teams began talking over each other on the comm channel, voices rising, instructions conflicting. Rail closed her eyes for 1 second. That IT was the same thing her mother had taught her. Breathe from here, not from your throat. You have more time than you think. She opened her eyes. Quiet on the channel, she said. Not loudly, just firmly, with the expectation of being heard. The channel quieted. We cannot fix the other team's problems from here, she said. We fix what is in front of us, and we do it right. Stay on your tasks. Brix had gone still at the far end of the corridor. A simulated hull stress event was throwing sound through the walls, a deep metallic groan that the system used to represent structural strain. It was a good simulation. It sounded like something enormous and slow deciding whether to break. Brix was from DOS, a dry, flat world. He had never heard a sound like that in his life. His hands were against the wall. Rail walked to him. She did not run. She stopped beside him, not in front, not blocking his view, just alongside him. You know what to do, she said quietly. I have watched you in every session this cycle. You are the best person in this group with a pressure anchor. I need you on the junction at the end of this corridor. Can you do that? Bricks looked at the wall. He looked at her. Yes, he said that he moved point 20 minutes later. Rail's team had cleared and secured 3 full decks. The damage report showed their section as stable. Across the rest of the station, the other teams had managed 2 between them. Sorvo's team had secured 1 and was still working the second when the exercise timer ended and the amber lights went back to white and the drill coordinator's voice returned to say the exercise was concluded. The full class gathered in the main assembly bay for the debrief. The coordinator read the results from his panel. Numbers in deck counts and response times. The room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when people are absorbing information that changes how they see something. Director Olin walked out from the side door and stood at the front of the room. He did not use the panel. He looked at the assembled cadets for a moment. The measure of a response team is not how well they perform when the scenario follows the plan, he said. It is what they do when the plan breaks, and someone still has to make decisions. He paused. Study the debrief data from second response team. All of you. He walked back out. The room stayed quiet for another few seconds. Then everyone began talking at once, and somewhere in the middle of it, Ren found Rail and stood next to her without saying anything. And that was enough. 3 days after the crisis drill, Sorvo went looking for Rail that he did not tell anyone. He did not mention it to the cadets who ate at his table or the 2 from his homeworld who had been his company since the first week. He found her by asking the corridor directory, which told him she had logged herself as present on the observation deck on the station's upper ring. The observation deck was a long curved room with no function except looking. 1 full wall was transparent, floor to ceiling, and beyond it was the open dark and the slow turn of distant stars. Most cadets came here in groups for the view. Rail was there alone, sitting on one of the low benches along the window, not looking at the stars so much as just being near them. Sorvo stopped a few steps away from her. She heard him and turned. She did not look surprised. She looked like someone who had already considered several possibilities and was waiting to see which one arrived. He stood there for a moment. Then he sat down at the far end of the bench, leaving space between them. I've been thinking about orientation day, he said. Rail said nothing. She waited. When I said, in the hall. He looked at the window. The stars outside were very still and very far away. I was wrong to say it. I knew your origin. I read the tag. And I made a joke because the room was full of people and it was easy. He paused. I am not saying this because of the simulation scores. I want to be clear about that. I am saying it because it was wrong and I knew it was wrong when I said it, and I said it anyway. Rail watched him for a moment. Why are you telling me? She asked. Not coldly, just an honest question. Because you deserve to hear it directly, he said. I could have avoided you for the rest of the cycle. It would have been easy, but that felt like the wrong kind of easy. She looked back at the window. Outside, a supply vessel moved slowly across the starfield, its running lights blinking at steady intervals. I stopped expecting people to know what Kareth 5 was, she said at last. A long time ago. You see the tag, and you think you understand what it means, but the tag is just a word. It does not carry the weight. She turned the edge of her sleeve between her fingers. A small absent gesture, the kind people made when they were deciding how much to give away. Most people who laugh do not know what they are laughing at. That does not make it kind, but makes it something other than cruelty. Sorvo was quiet. Tell me something real about it, he said. Kareth 5, not the facts. Something real. Rail looked at him. She considered this for a while. When I was 12, she said, there was a flood. One of the deep drainage channels on the eastern side of the colony breached during a storm, and my brother and I were on the wrong side of it, coming back from checking the outer wire. My brother broke his leg in the first hour. Clean break, but bad ground, and we had 2 kilometers to go back to the wall. She said the way you said things you had carried for a long time, without drama, just the weight of the facts laid out carefully. He guided me the whole way, told me where to step, kept talking so I would keep moving and so he would not think about the pain. We told each other stories. Old ones our mother used to tell us. By the time we reached the gate, he was white in the face and could barely stand. She stopped. He died 3 years later. A storm season, a different kind of problem, but I still hear his voice sometimes when I'm moving through bad ground. telling me where to step. The observation deck was very quiet. Sorvo looked at the window for a long time. I would not have lasted a week there, he said. Not as a compliment, just honestly. The words of someone who had genuinely tried to imagine it and arrived at a true answer. Maybe, Rail said. Maybe not. People are more than what their homeworld makes them. That goes both ways. You are sharp and you are fast, and you do not fold under pressure. I have watched you. Kareth, 5 would have hurt you. It hurts everyone. But hurt and finished are not the same thing. Sorvo looked at her. There was nothing easy in what she had said. She had not softened it to make him feel better, but she had also not twisted it to make him feel worse. It was just the truth as she saw it, offered without conditions. He nodded slowly. Thank you, he said. She turned back to the window. The supply vessel was gone. The stars were where they had always been. They sat there in silence for a while, which was its own kind of answer. Across the deck, near the entrance, Rin stood in the doorway and saw them sitting together. Rin did not go in. Rin just stood there for a moment, watching, and then turned and walked back down the corridor, feeling something it did not quite have a word for, something that felt like the beginning of a thing becoming true. The end of cycle ceremony did not begin with speeches. It began with numbers. The Academy's assessment board displayed results on the main hall's projection wall, category by category, and the cadets stood in rows and watched their cycle of work become data. Physical response, technical knowledge, tactical reasoning, team performance, individual scores and group scores, and a final composite that added everything together and produced a ranking that would follow each cadet into whatever came next. Rail stood in the third row. She had arrived early and found a place near the center because she wanted a clear view of the display. She was not nervous. She had done everything she could do, and she knew what she had done, and waiting to see numbers did not change any of it. Her composite ranking placed her 6th out of the full class of 92. Sorvo placed 8th. He found her eyes across the rows after his number appeared. He nodded once. She nodded back. But the rankings were not the part that the room would remember. At the end of the category results, the assessment board displayed a second set of notations, commendations for specific performance in specific events. There were 12 of them for the full class. Rail's name appeared on 4, which was more than any other single cadet. The last commendation, read aloud by the board coordinator in a flat and official voice, was not a category anyone had seen awarded before. It was listed under a designation that most cadets had to look up on their personal pads because the term was not in the orientation materials. Environmental Impact Designation. Reserve according to the Academy records for cadets who changed the learning environment itself for the other students. Not by being the best individual performer, by making the cadets around them better, more capable, more aware through the example of their presence over the full cycle. There were 4 such designations in the Academy's 19-cycle history. Raildon was the 5th. The room did not applaud immediately. There was a pause first, the kind of pause that happened when a group of people realized at the same moment that they had been part of something they had not fully recognized while it was happening. Then the sound came up. Director Olin spoke last. He stood at the front of the room without notes, which was how he always spoke when he meant the words entirely. The students who pass through this institution come from hundreds of worlds, he said. They bring different strengths and different limits. What we try to measure here is not how strong you were when you arrived. It is whether you made the space around you more capable than it was before you arrived. He looked out at the assembled cadets. Some of you will understand this cycle better in a year's time than you do today. That is normal. Understanding takes distance sometimes. He said nothing more and walked back to his position. Afterward, the cadets moved to the outer ring corridor and the wide viewports that looked into open space. It was the informal tradition after the ceremony. No instructor had started it. It had just become what people did. They drifted in groups toward the stars and talked and breathed differently now that the formal part was over. Rail stood at the viewport at the corridor's far end, the one with the widest view, where the station's edge curved away on both sides and the stars filled everything in front of her. Ren came and stood beside her without speaking. Brix came and stood behind her, which was his way of standing with someone. He did not do close proximity easily, but he stood there, solid and deliberate, and that was enough. Sorvo came last. He stopped at a distance of 2 steps, which was a respectful distance, and he did not try to make it smaller than it was. He had earned a little ground this cycle, but not all of it, and he knew the difference. They stood there together, the 4 of them, and looked at the stars. Rael reached into the pocket of her dress uniform jacket and took out the small brown stone. She turned it in her fingers. The red streak through the middle caught the viewport light and held it for a moment. She was not thinking about the commendations. She was not thinking about her ranking or about Sorvo's voice in their rival hall on the first day or about any of the things that had happened in between. She was thinking about her brother guiding her through the flood, about her mother's hand flat against her chest, about the people in her colony who knew each other's roles and did not leave each other behind. She had carried all of it here, packed in with the stone and the worn jacket and the technical manuals she had read twice on the shuttle. Everything she knew was real, she had told Ren once. It was still true. It would always be true. The stone was smooth and familiar in her palm. She was ready for whatever came next. In his office on the upper deck, Director Olin sat alone with the last of the assessment files. He went through them in order, making brief notes. When he reached Rael's file, he spent a little longer than usual, reading through the sim data and the drill debrief and the environmental impact assessment one more time. Then he closed the file, set it down, and picked up his pen. Across the top of the cover page, he wrote one word. Exceptional. He set the pen down and looked at it for a moment. Then he moved on to the next file, because there was always more work to do.